Hello everyone and welcome to the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lectures 2021 in association with JSW. This is our 8th year and a very significant one because we're calling it the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lectures. This is in memory of the man who started it all and left such a rich cultural heritage behind. Like last year, we will continue with conversations instead of the lectures, and this is because of the ongoing pandemic conditions. A very special thanks goes out to Sangeeta Jindal. Her unstinting support over the years to the Independence Lectures has made it that much stronger. Thank you, Sangeeta. But before I hand over the mic to her, I'd like to thank everybody for joining in. Thank you and have a great evening.
Today, more than ever, we look up to science to light the way ahead. Science empowers by giving us hope. I look forward to Dr. Mashelkar's thoughts about how we should look back on scientific progress in the country and what he envisages will be the challenges ahead. I welcome him and Dr. Janvi Falke to enlighten us about these topics in today's conversation.
Thank you, Amy and Sangeeta. Good evening, everyone. JSW presents the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lecture 2021. The first session of the two-part series of our Independence Lectures is titled Science, Innovation and Technology, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. Joining us this evening is a man with an indomitable will and an illuminated mind, Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan and Padma Vibhushan, Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, who has played a pivotal role in shaping India's national science, technology and innovation policies in post-liberalized India. Dr. Mashelkar will be in conversation with Dr. Janvi Falke, Founding Director of Science Gallery, Bangalore, a historian of science and filmmaker. Dr. Falke is the author of Atomic State, Big Science in 20th Century India, and producer-director of the documentary film Cyclotron. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Mashelkar and Dr. Falke. The conversation will be followed by a Q&A, so do send us your questions in the chat window. Over to you, Dr. Falke.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am absolutely delighted for this opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar this evening. And thank you to Literature Live and JSW for making it possible. I look forward to exploring this evening moments that have been incredibly important in Dr. Mashelkar's personal journey, but how, and I hope that with his help, we will be able to understand how they have been, in fact, important moments in the history of Indian science, especially in the last 40 odd years. So Dr. Mashelkar, thank you very much for agreeing to this conversation. Let me start by asking you, what was your motivation to embark on a career in industrial scientific research? And could you tell us about yourself and the journey that brought you to industrial scientific research?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think before I answer your question, I must pay tribute to a legendary personality, my great friend Anil Dharker. In fact, I consider it as a very, very special honor, very special privilege to have been asked to give the very first, the inaugural Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lecture. I was mentioning somewhere on the other day that, when God makes it, scientists should not speak like that, but I will begin by speaking unlike a scientist. He does an assembly line approach, but occasionally he has time at his hand and then he makes some special people. Anil was that. He was very, very, very special. It's hard to believe that he is no more. But his memory will live on, his message will live on, his inspiration will live on. To me, he was an institution. Individuals go, institutions don't go. So he will live on. So thank you. Yes, Janhavi, you asked me about my personal journey and how I got into science before I got into industrial science or industrial scientific research, as you mentioned. Interestingly, it is linked to a school teacher, my first inspiration. And had I not met him, I don't know what direction my life would have taken. So let me begin with that. I was born in a very poor family in a village called Mashel in Goa. That is how I'm Mashelkar. And my father died, unfortunately, when I was 6. I was the only son, and my mother was illiterate. And she brought me to Mumbai in search of a job. And I remember the hard days, initial hard days. She did practically manual work to bring me up, whatever job she could get. 2 meals a day was a challenge. I studied under street lights. I remember walking barefoot until I was 12. And I went to municipal school, studied in Marathi, by the way. And I normally emphasize everywhere when I mention that it didn't make any difference going to a municipal school and studying in Marathi. Anyway, so when I passed the 7th standard, the primary school, to get into the secondary school, we required some 21 rupees. And my mother took some 3 weeks to get that money, and we borrowed it finally from a housemaid who was working in Chowpatty in a Gujarati family. That was her saving, and she gave it to me. And the time taken was so much that all the admissions in good schools were closed. And there was a poor school, Union High School, where the lowest of the strata, from the society, students used to go. And that was a lucky break for me, because that poor school had rich teachers, and one of them was Principal Bhave. And he was the one who was responsible for creating some new thinking in my life. Janhavi, he was not a chalk and talk teacher. We want us to see life and learn from that. For example, soap making. Everybody knows how to make soap. You take sodium hydroxide, you take a fatty acid, you can write. In fact, you can get 12 out of 10 in answering that. But if you ask how many of you have seen a soap factory, hardly a hand will go up. He took us to see a soap factory, Hindustan Lever, in Sivri. We went by tram. I did not have 5 paisa to pay for my ticket. He was also poor, but perhaps less poor than me, and he paid. And he showed us how the soap is made. He took us by train to Vimco to show how a matchbox is made, for example, the entire thing. So what happened was that he started showing us how things happen in life and how science is converted into the final products that come in our hand. And one of the experiments, Janhavi, that he did on one of those days, it was a sunny day, he took us out into the sun. He had a convex lens in his hand, and he wanted to show us how to find the focal length. And he held the convex lens like this, he moved the paper up and down, and at a point in time, there was a brightest point. And he said, this is the focal length. And he held it for some time, and the paper burnt. And when the paper burnt, he turned to me somehow or the other, and he said, Mashelkar, like this, if you can focus, you can achieve anything in the world. That did 2 things for me, Janhavi. One, I said, science is so powerful, I must become a scientist. But it also told me about, you focus and you can achieve anything in life. That gave me the philosophy of life. And I still remember he's mentioning to us at that time, we talk about renewable energy, we talk about solar energy. And he said, without using kerosene, how you can, as a matter of fact, use the solar energy. So those were early days, which were very inspirational for me, where I could see science and its application for the good of the humanity. All right. And that is how actually I would say I got into science. And later on, as you call it, industrial science or industrial scientific research, making science that can make economic sense, making science that can make social sense, and which is good for the society.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear you say this, because increasingly, as we are told, that information is available online, there are YouTube videos, there's this, there's that. I think the place of inspirational teachers is quite, in fact, incredible in the life of a student. And I hope we come back to this a little further down the line. you did several things, and I will let you briefly capture that as you say this. But the question that I want to ask you is that then you soared. I mean, you went abroad. You were doing fabulous things. You were on a track to with your focus doing well. You returned to India at what some might consider a rather young age, when you had opportunities for career that looked quite bright elsewhere. So what brought you back? And more so, and this is something that I would personally like to know, what were the first years of being back in India like for you?
Yes. I remember I did my science, did my inter science, and then got into chemical engineering in what was then called as UDCT, University Department of Chemical Technology. Now it is called ICT, Institute of Chemical Technology.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud to say that I'm the chancellor of my alma mater, by the way, for the last 9 years. And it's a matter of such a pride. It's a great institution. In fact, what happened was that I was always at the top of a class. And what used to happen was that when you got your bachelor's degree, in my case, became Eng, you would apply abroad and you will get number of fellowships. University always had the reputation that at least 5 to 6 students will get into top US universities. And I had got admission into 4 universities, 3 in US and 1 in Canada. So normally one was supposed to work. But then I met Professor M.M. Sharma. He was my inspiration. He was just a young man, just 27, he had just come back. And Janvi, can you imagine? He got full professorship, by the way. They did not ask him, where is your 10 years teaching experience? The word was different at that time,
Indeed.
And he was so brilliant. He had worked under Professor P.V. Dankers, who is the father of chemical engineering. And he really inspired me. And Janvi, I said to myself, I was so inspired. I said, where can I get a better guru? Forget about going abroad, etc. I have done many unconventional things in my life, and I worked with him. But when I did my PhD, basically I went abroad, and I actually had a choice of a permanent position or a semi-permanent position as an associate lecturer in UMIS, University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, which was among the top 3, versus a temporary fellowship, non-Newtonian fluid mechanics postdoctoral. But I wanted to change my field, and I went there, and I will tell you later as to how that happened, as a matter of fact. And I built a top school. Now, coming to your question, this is a background. And then I was doing so well that I had a number of offers, not only in UK, but in US. And one day I got a telex. Many people might not even heard about telex. This was before fax came in, or email came in. So I got a telex from Dr. B.D. Chirag, who was the director of National Chemical Laboratory. I'm saying that you go and meet Dr. Naidu. Dr. Naidu was the then Director General of CSR. Okay. And he had come because what was happening in India was that top, bright scientists would come and they will not get a job, and they will get frustrated by the bureaucracy and they will go back. And in fact, our Professor Khurana, who got a Nobel Prize, he couldn't get a job and he had gone back, etc. Those were the days. So I believe Mrs. Gandhi told him, just go, spot the brightest and offer them jobs. No bureaucracy, nothing. And that is how I think my name was in that shortlist whom he wanted to meet. So when Professor Chirag told me, go and meet him in Savoy Hotel on such and such day at such and such time, I didn't ask him why, because you have to always listen to the guru. I went there. And I'll tell you, those were magical moments. Dr. Naidu, talked about emerging India, the new India. And he said, people like you, because that time brain drain was prevalent. You will come back, but when you get old, and etc., etc. But you as a young person, I was barely 32, by the way, you are coming back now and setting up something would be really terrific for the country. And Janvi, I don't think from here, I think from here. I said, yes, I'm coming back. And this was at a time when everything was going well. And I remember I talked to Vaishali in the evening. Nation is calling us and this, etc. And she has always supported me. I think my wife, Vaishali, and my mother have played a fantastic role in my life. Anyway, and we came back. Now, your second part of the question, how about it? It was a poor country, by the way. We are then now today we talk about $2,000 the GDP the dollar per capita. That time we talk about $200, by the way. All right. And for doing research, it was extraordinarily difficult. For example, I was trained in a field called rheology and non-Newtonian fluid mechanics. I wanted my first Weisenberg goniometer to do experiment. And for that, it was only an imported equipment I could get. You know, Janvi, how much time it would take? 2 years. Why? Country didn't have foreign exchange. So there was a regulation. DGTD clearance, not manufactured in India certificate would take 2 years. So what do? Do I sit like this? I changed my field. And I went into modeling and simulation. The conditions were so difficult. Can you imagine that the journals used to come by sea mail, and therefore they would take about 3 months. So Janvi, what happened in the rest of the world? There's no internet, nothing. You would come to know after 3 months. How can you be competitive? You know, and look at the computational facilities. I remember with Pune University sharing what is called as ISL 1904, IBM computer sharing, 128K. Can you just imagine? Yeah. So those were the conditions under which actually one came back. But I want to end by saying that scarcity and aspiration is a deadly combination. And if you combine that, I would say that was journey. Many times I feel that you should be hungry. Scarcity makes you hungry, and then you achieve great things.
It's really interesting to hear this, how you in a way dealt with scarcity, because today when people like myself, we come back, information lag is not there in a sense, because of the internet, because of the means of communication. But resources still remain a different kind of question, nothing at the scale, of course, at which you experienced it. And I must say, I never got the chance to meet Professor Nayudamma. But, I've seen images of him, imposing personality, and I can just imagine how convincing he must have been to someone who clearly had a bright future or a bright career path ahead of him, and to say, no, there's something else you can do. So I mean, to those listening to us, I'm sure are going to think that we are fast forwarding this, but I'm guessing they will go back, read your book, etc., and also hopefully talk to you through other means, because there's so much ground to cover. I'm going to now. You're back, you're doing things, you're moving fields. And I'm going to go to 1998, which is within a few years of the decision to liberalize, the decision to open Indian markets, to look at the question of foreign exchange in a different way, to look at India's place in the world in a different way. And in that year, you received 2 remarkably distinguished awards. The 2 awards coming to one person was unprecedented in Indian science, and I think we can say that very safely. You were awarded, and let me get this right, a fellowship of the Royal Society, which is something that is, one expects for people who advance knowledge in fundamental science, in basic sciences. But in the same year, you also got the J.R.D. Tata Corporate Leadership Award. This is unusual. Could you share with us a little bit about the work for which you were honored by both, and incredibly so, at the same time? And that, I think, will help us understand, the years between when you came back and basically planted 2 flags.
Yeah. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, that was a great coincidence. I think the 2 awards, in fact, the J.R.D. Tata Corporate Leadership Award was made for businessmen only. One before me was Narayan Murthy, and one after me was Premji, by the way.
Yes.
So people used to talk about Saraswati getting sandwiched between Lakshmi and Lakshmi. I remember where I got that. And in 30 years, no, the scientist has got it. So that was very unusual. FRS, Fellowship of Royal Society, is for the fundamental science that you do.
Yes.
All right. And so therefore, the short answer to your question, and then I will elaborate. FRS was for the science that I did.
Yep.
And J.R.D. Tata Corporate Leadership Award was for science leadership that I did. One was for science, another one was science leadership. Now, as far as the FRS is concerned, let me tell you a bit about it. In 360 years in engineering science, there have been only three engineers who have got FRS. One is my own guru, Professor M.M. Sharma. The second was Professor Uddam Narasimha.
Yes.
A great iconic legend in aeronautics and science and technology linked to that. And third is myself. Unfortunately, as you know, Uddam passed away
Yes.
a couple of months ago.
Yep.
So there are only two of us that are left. So it's very, very prestigious. I was always fascinated because I remember when I got FRS, I got a very interesting mail from one FRS. He said, now only two greater things can happen in your life. One is Nobel Prize and second is death. One is sure, certain, and another is uncertain. So that was the sort of level of honor. And I remember, and of course, the great honor is signing in the same book where Newton has signed, etc.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the legendary. The work that I did was basically, of course, the modeling and simulation work, because I changed my field, is of course one. But more importantly, we had done work on what are called as super absorbing polymers. What are super absorbing polymers? You take a gram of water and put it in a gram of that polymer and put it in water, and it swells, and it can absorb, like Agasti swallowed the sea. It can absorb 100 gram, 200 gram, 300 gram of water. Okay. So we had developed such a polymer, and we called it Jal Shakti. It was commercialized by a company called Indian Organic Chemicals. The rest of the world was using such super absorbing polymers for diapers. But in NCL, National Chemical Laboratory, as you enter, you see the sort of the message. The purpose of this laboratory is to advance science and use it for the good of the people. Okay. So what is the good of the people in India? It's not diapers, but it was agriculture. Because what happens is that if you take such a polymer and coat it, on a seed, and then sow it, and the rains come and they don't come for 10 days, all right, it doesn't matter because this absorbs the water and sort of keeps it. That was the practical part of it. But the fundamental part of it was the magic of why does it absorb so much? The molecular level investigations, and we contributed to that. Not only that, we showed that these polymers could be stimuli responsive. That means you change the temperature by 1 degree, they can completely collapse or expand, or change pH by 1 degree, they can completely expand or collapse. So we went into the science of that, as a matter of fact, and that science was so deep that we opened some new doors. In fact, I had asked somebody, how do you select the FRS? And he said, we only ask one thing. Supposing he has written 360 papers, okay? And if these papers were all deleted, would science have taken a little left turn or right turn? You get the point.
Yes.
So I think that work made that difference, and that is the reason I got FRS. As far as the JRD Tata corporate leadership is concerned, I must give entire credit to my CSR family, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. Because when I took over as the Director General of CSR, actually, it was in a very different state, as a matter of fact. 40 laboratories behaved as though they were individual laboratories, etc. There was no team CSR spirit. In fact, laboratories competed with each other. Then the entire issue about doing science and its application industry, that partnership was actually missing. And I must say that marketing of knowledge, CSR knowledge base, where people like Dr. Bhojwani, my colleagues, I must give a lot of credit to all that team. We created a new CSR vision, etc. And that transformation of CSR, as user-friendly, performance-driven organization made all the difference, as a matter of fact. And that is where I got the JRD Tata Corporate Leadership Award. So one is for doing science at a cutting edge, and the other one is all because of my family of CSR, who transformed themselves.
Fabulous. So I would like us to turn to two ideas that inform your leadership and speak back to your decision, a long time ago to return to India. Let me first discuss the first one with you. You've been called Dr. Patentkar or Dr. Patentkar. Who called you that first? And more so, can you tell us the story behind why this name matters and it has come to be associated so closely with you?
Yeah, no, I love that question, because, and I will take 5 minutes to sort of explain the whole thing. Not only that, why it is so important, because by this conversation, we not only reflect on our past, but what is our future and where we need to go. And this is one area where if we really want to build a great knowledge economy and become a technology power, we have to sort of move forward. So first, your question about patents and Patentkar. India has had a peculiar history. Sir J.C. Bose was the inventor of the wireless local loop. He had demonstrated. But when Sister Nivedita went to him and said, patent it, he said, no, knowledge is free, and maybe he had the right principle. But Marconi came later, and he actually patented it, and all of us have learned in school Marconi did it. But it was J.C. Bose. Why? He did not patent it. That was 1898. In 1998, I had to fight the Basmati patent battle, by the way. There was this Texmati that was created by a Texas company and so on. So from 1898 to 1998, this has been a journey from Bose to Basmati, as far as India is concerned. I used to talk about patent illiteracy and so on and so forth. So the triggers actually came when I took over as the director of National Chemical Laboratory. 1989, this is 2 years before liberalization. Now, at that point in time, all that we did, we were so protected with heavy tariff barriers that there was no incentive for innovation. Copying, reverse engineering was the norm, so as to say, okay? And therefore, we were doing reverse engineering, no forward engineering and so on and so forth. So 1989, I remember, in fact, my experience was that if we did something which was ahead of the rest of the world, and we went to Indian industry, they would say, but has America done it? Has Europe done it? Has Japan? If then how can we? So I remember in my very first speech on 1st June 89, in an auditorium of 540, we had 1,200 people, by the way, packed. 9 o'clock I took over, 11 o'clock I spoke, and I said National Chemical Laboratory will be international chemical. We'll export our knowledge to the rest of the world, rather than being importers and rather than being copying and reverse engineering. And for some reason, I had read General Electric's some breakthrough in polymers, because I'm a polymer man. I was polymerker, by the way, Mashalkar, polymerker. And then I said we should. And then I remember one young scientist came to me. He said, "Sir, you're talking about licensing our patents to General Electric. Do you know their R&D budget is 2.5 times India's R&D budget?" I said to him, "It is not the size of the budget that matters. It's the size of the idea that matters. And since you talked about G, we'll take on G." And I remember in my modeling and simulation, I had come across this solid state polycondensation as a process, from which our PET bottles are made.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was not done for polycarbonate. That was an engineering plastic. And in polycarbonate, General Electric had 40% share. So they were leaders. And we got new ideas in areas that they were leaders. And when we actually got this breakthrough on solid state polycondensation, normally, it was a publish or perish culture. We said, no, patent, publish and prosper. First patent. So we filed US patents, by the way. Now, this was in a laboratory where in 39 years, there was no US patent. All right. And within 2 years, we licensed it to General Electric for close to $1 million. 3 patents we crossed. And Dr. Sivaram and others, have to be given credit for that. But the point was that that's the time we got to understand the importance of patents. And then, of course, the culture in sort of changed, and later on in CSR also changed. But what I want to also emphasize is that while all this thing was going on, there were others who influenced it. Who were influencers. I remember Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. In 1993, he had called me to address all the 55 DRDO directors. And I remember my respect for him was so much. I said, Mr. Technology of India, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, etc. I addressed him. And then I talked about patents and patent literacy and why they were going to be important now that the economy had opened and competition and so on and so forth. And I explained what is patent literacy, ability to read, ability to write. You read it in such a way you can bypass it, write it in such a way nobody can bypass it, and so on and so forth. During lunch, he said, Mashelkar, you called me Mr. Technology of India, but do you know I'm Mr. Patent Illiterate of India? Tell me how that can be useful for DRDO, you know? And then I explained to him, you can't patent a missile, but a sensor system, etc., etc. Then he called somebody and he said, hey, listen to this Mashelkar, he has become a patentkar now. Okay, and do what he said. So this was that, and then DRDO, they created a system, etc. Similarly, industry, Tata's, Tisco. I remember traveling with JJ Irani, who was the managing director. And he said, Mashelkar, you keep on talking about patents, but they are important for pharma, etc. Steel mein kya karenge hum log? Then I explained to him. And I remember he created a movement. In fact, I have preserved a letter that he said what difference it made. So whether it was Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam or industry and others, in fact, last point I'll tell you, it's a very interesting one. You know, we have the Yeroda jail here, as you know, in Pune.
Yes.
And they had called me to address some 1,800 of their outgoing inmates, prisoners who were going to go out. So they said, when they go out, they should face the world with confidence. Please inspire them. So they took me after the lecture was over. They said, we want to show you something. And they showed me something, Janvi, where actually, they used to make 10,000 chapatis per day. So there were huge grinding and mixing machines and so on and so forth. And two engineers who were unfortunately jailed, they had innovated and created something. And they went to the jailer and says, there is some Mashelkar who keeps on talking about patents. Can we take a patent? And can you imagine that Yeroda jail has taken a patent? So I think the important part is that it was not this, but the entire thing. And the last point, of course, in terms of patents, as you know, the turmeric patent, the wrong patent that was given on wound healing properties of US. And we from CSIR challenged it. And that had a tremendous impact, as a matter of fact. Because when I became the chairman of a Standing Committee on Information Technology in WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, they were not recognizing traditional knowledge as knowledge at all. And I challenged them. I said, you think that the knowledge that is generated in Harvard and Caltech is knowledge, and knowledge generated by my predecessors in laboratories of life is not knowledge? That is wrong. And they changed. And B.K. Gupta has to be given credit for that. He created the traditional knowledge resource classification. And then we created the traditional knowledge digital library, by the way, CSR created. More than 3 crore pages where all that knowledge has been basically captured, and that has stopped the biopiracy in terms of our traditional knowledge. So my patenting story, and I'm very proud to be called sort of patent girl. So thank you for asking that.
It is, given, especially this is a word that you used when we earlier spoke, which is, India as a participant in the knowledge economy, and that's the word you had used. It is very important to recognize what role patents in a way play, and how geopolitics in a sense plays out. And we saw that act out very, very well during the Basmati as well as the turmeric patents, and what that means for protection of knowledge, protection of, process-based patent, product patents, but also ideas and knowledge, that are possessed here. And so why that might actually be an incredibly important part of how India plays out its role in the global knowledge economy. There's another idea that is associated very closely with your work. And I think this is something, we've had very serious and in-depth discussions on appropriate technology, on which is in a sense on the same continuum, on the same spectrum as talking about, protection of knowledge systems that have been in places like India and elsewhere, which are not, unfortunately, at times taken seriously. You have taken the idea of appropriate technology to in a way, develop a concept around it. And so Gandhian engineering is something that is also associated quite closely with your work. And it has attracted not only attention in India, but also internationally. And it is, to my mind, the idea carries depth because it is a concept that has been thought through. quite well. I think it jostles with other ideas that have recently come up in India, which sort of leave one thinking, okay, how does this play out, especially when ideas from India in a way go abroad. I think it would be great if you were able to share with our audiences what to you is Gandhian engineering, and why does the idea travel so well?
Yes. What happened was that in 2008, I became the fellow of Australian Academy of Science and Technology. And in Canberra, I was supposed to give a talk on innovation. Okay. And I said, and I was the first fellow to become, by the way, fellow of that academy. So there are 100 other people who are better than me. So I said, since they have chosen me, they don't know enough about India. So I must tell them something about India. So I titled my lecture as Gandhian engineering. Okay. And I said, you must be knowing computer engineering and electronic engineering, etc., etc. What is Gandhian engineering? So I took two principles of Gandhi. One was, there is enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. What it means is that those resources which are exhaustible or non-renewable, please use them carefully so that your great-grandchildren and their great-grandchildren will have. That is the idea of more from less. Okay? That means use less and less resource to get more and more productivity or more and more. The other one was, the benefits of science must reach all, all sections of the society. That means for more and more people. Combining that, you have more from less for more. Now, why is it different, Janvi? We know that high technology can be made to work for reach. So it is like spending more resources, basically, and doing it for less people, because very few can afford it. When it comes to poor, we can say, oh, well, less from less. Kind of a third-rate technology will also work for them because they can't afford. Here the idea is different. Here the idea is that of affordable excellence. They are contradictory because when we say affordable, it can't be excellent. When it is excellent, it can't be sort of affordable. Now, let me illustrate that basically by showing you a film. Okay? Because there is no better way of doing it. So may we have the film, please?
Just could we have the film, please?
Yes. Now, this is a film where this is a Jaipur foot patient, by the way. See the way he actually climbs. All right. What a dexterous foot it is. Then you can see him actually jump. And that foot is so good that it is able to bear that weight. Okay. You know how much does this foot cost? $28. Not $10,000, just $28. So this is the affordable part of it. Then you would say, where is the excellent part of it? Now you will see the excellence. The excellence part of it is when he starts running. And he covers in 1 kilometer in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Can you just imagine? Now, when I give this lecture to the audience of, let's say, 500, and I ask them, how many of you can actually run a kilometer in 4 minutes, 30 seconds? Generally, hardly 4 or 5 hands go up. What it means is that he is able to beat 99% of that audience. Just imagine him. Just imagine the importance of affordable excellence. First, he has lost his leg. Supposing nothing was given to him, he'll be crawling and it will take an hour to reach that kilometer. Secondly, if you give him less from less, that means a wooden foot. How much time will it take to sort of run? You can imagine, maybe he will not be able to run at all with that weight. But the Jaipur foot, which is such beautiful high technology, is sort of incorporated in that, allows him to do a minute in 1 minute 4 minutes. So what it means is that the Gandhian engineering creates, despite income inequality, access equality, and therefore access to not only life, but dignity. Because we know that people who are wearing Jaipur foot, actually they get married, they work, they are like any other normal sort of human being. So this is the principle of more from less for more. And now you might say, how did it catch in the rest of the world? Once I'm possessed with an idea like pattern, I was possessed with this. And I remember within 10 years, I have given more than 50 or 60 lectures around the world, influencing World Bank, for example. I remember they created actually a $55 million project in Vietnam on inclusive innovation with a dictum of getting more from less for more. Asian Development Bank, I taught there, they created project. I remember talking in European Commission, basically, and they incorporated these ideas over there. Because what is happening is that, I spoke in Beijing, by the way, actually, because they were worried about social disharmony that was coming and getting more from less for more, because I think you see what China from only what you see at the front end.
Correct.
The back end, the kind of poverty that they have, and suffering, that is not normally shown. So that is where it made sort of the difference. And the last point I would like to make is that I just didn't give lectures. My own CSI, practice Gandhian engineering, making things that are affordable, like drugs, therapeutics, a whole range of things. The entire generic industry was built by CSR with affordable, high quality drugs. But in my personal life also, I tried to do something, in my mother's name, Anjali Mashetki Inclusive Innovation Award, I created. It's a small award of 1 lakh. But what it does, Jan, in 2 minutes, let me tell you, it Anjali Mashetki Inclusive Innovation Award. That award is not given to the best practice. It is given to the next practice. I'm not a great believer in best practice, because then you are following something that the rest of the world has done. Okay? Best and inclusive. Now, in that part, we have given several awards. This is the 11th year of the award. One of them I like to demonstrate to you. Take ECG. For example, if there is a woman in a village and she has a pain and she has to be taken for an ECG, you'll put her in a bullock cart or a motorcycle or a jeep and take her a few kilometers away. But just imagine she had a portable ECG, which she can use like a thermometer. And then the best the sort of expert in Pune or Mumbai or Delhi could actually see that. What a wonder it will be. It looks impossible, isn't it? But that has been made possible. This is what it is. This is called Sanket. Rahul Rastogi created this. So you have these 2 sensors. You put your 2 thumbs here, basically for 15 seconds. This is your heart. 15 seconds, 15 seconds, 15, 15, 15, 15 seconds. And within 3 minutes, it goes to the best. Now, Rahul Rastogi has sold more than, I think, 2 lakh by now of these basically devices in 8 countries, and it is making a difference. Per ECG, it just costs 5 rupees. And you can sort of buy it on Amazon. It has been fully certified. It is as good as 12. This is affordable excellence. Excellence because it is 12. Affordable because it is 5 rupees per ECG. If there was more time, I would have explained to you even sort of more. But the point is, this is exactly what we need. And why does India need that today? Because during the pandemic, millions of people from poverty have moved to extreme poverty.
Indeed.
Yeah, you see that? And that is why we desperately need innovations which represent affordable excellence, so as to say. That's what Gandhi engineering is all.
Thank you. No, I think that's actually, it deepens the debate that started out, with people like Amulya Reddy on appropriate technology. And it seems like with Gandhian engineering and the ideas and the awards that are now in place, the idea is getting more teeth. And these are questions from here. These are questions for India. And, in a sense, what is relevant to our context, and this is not, of course, only in India, but like you mentioned, Vietnam and Kenya, places which confront problems with like ourselves will find these technologies useful, and therefore, hopefully, address some of the concerns and take it to a different level, so to speak. I'm glad you brought up the question of China, because it is a question of utmost geopolitical importance today, especially for us in India. Because you earlier mentioned also reverse engineering. And the example that comes to mind, because I delved a little bit into the history of aerodynamics and aeronautics, is the question of the MiGs that came from the Soviet Union. India also got MiGs, and so did China. Indian MiGs have worked and, not worked, and, they're there. They have, of course, consolidated the air power of this country. But the Chinese are today producing 4th generation MiGs. And so reverse engineering took a very different path in China. And that to me is one example that tells us what, in a way, where the paths diverge. Because in the 40s, in the late 40s, 47 for India, 49 for China, they looked comparable. They looked to each other for support. They looked to each other also as an example. But there came a point when the paths, in a way, went differently. I'd like to know your assessment of what this divergence means, why this divergence came about, and what its implications are for, again, scientific research as well as sort of technical competence and participation in the global economy, global knowledge economy for China and India.
Yeah. No, an excellent question. And as you very rightly pointed out, we were at the same level in many, many things, and see the way they have actually moved out. First, let us look at the output part of it. One of the products that you talked about. And then I will tell you about the input that they made and the policy changes that they made. It is with the output in terms of, since we talk about science, if you look at research papers, by the way, mid-90s were at the same level, by the way, in terms of the number of papers, etc., etc. Can you believe it? In 2020, July 2020, they have occupied now the #1 position. They have displaced US to the 2nd position. All right. Then you would say, oh, China means there is a problem with regard to quality, etc. Nothing to it. In terms of the citations, which measures scientific citations, their quality, is comparable to the US now, 24% and 22% among the top cited. Okay. So that is different. Now, we are also proud that US is #1, China is #2, and now we have occupied #3 position. But what is the difference? The difference is that our number of research papers are 1/4 that of China, although we are in 3rd position. So the difference between the 2nd and 3rd is quite large.
Yeah.
Okay. So we must raise our aspiration to solve. That is first. Secondly, patents. I'll tell you, I'm very proud of my CSR, so I'll keep on singing praises. I remember the patenting culture in CSR went to such an extent, as a matter of fact, that in 2002, when there were the table that came up from Asia, by the way, on PCT filings, patent cooperation treaty filing, that was considered as one of the important indicators, was #1, CSR, was #2, LG, #3, Samsung, and #4 was UI, China. That was 2003. Today, UI is #1, not just in Asia, but around the world, as a matter of fact. It is incredible. And if you look at the China's share, etc., and if you look at their kind of numbers, they are sort of 10 times more than us. So that is that. Then you look at high-tech exports, for example, of the manufactured goods, they are 31% as against over 9%. If you look at the way they are reversing the brain drain, for example, in 2000, 1 or 2 out of 10 Chinese who left China and went abroad came back. 8 to 9 come back. As a matter of fact, there are a number of programs, like including the 1,000 talents, where they are getting back 7,000 students a year. In comparison to our programs, we also have some programs where we are talking about 649 students coming back in 2012 to 17. So what I'm saying is that we are making a progress, but they are far ahead. I mean, we look at supercomputers, for example, in 1998, when Param 10,000 came, we were on par. Today, if you see last year's figure, 2019, among the top 500 supercomputers, there are 219 of China, and India is just 5. So they have actually raced ahead. And these are the kind of outputs. Then we would say, what are the inputs? If you look at the investment in science and technology, again, we are on par. We are 0.7% of GDP, they are 0.7% of GDP. Today, they are 4 times more than us in terms of percentage GDP, 2.5% plus. And we are still 0.7% after 20 years. All right. Although I've seen announcements one after the other, including while I was in Delhi, that we'll raise it to 2%. It has not still happened. basically. And in actual terms, you can see now, because their economy is much bigger, they're spending 7 to 8 times more. So I think I'm giving an honest admission that they have raced ahead of us. But still, I personally feel that India has an advantage. Why?
Mhm.
I'll tell you. One advantage is this inclusive innovation.
Mhm.
Somehow that they were not mastered that sort of art, and that's why in Beijing, for example, when they had this thing, I went there as a World Bank sort of consultant, and that report is available on the web, on where the sort of they can. Secondly, in terms of IPR, their reliability, the methods that they have followed are not rational. India is an ethical country. We do think by ethics. The way they will take up technology and do those sorts of things. So therefore, on that index, they rank very, very low. And I would like India to be an honest player in this game, an IPR game, and move forward. Do we have the capacity? Last point, January, you will ask.
Yes.
We have the capacity, because I always am very proud of Indian talent. Atalji, when he used to say, India's future is in IT, IT is in information technology. I used to say, yeah, it is in IT, but IT as an Indian talent. And the rest of the world recognizes it. Today, you are in Bangalore, you see the number of multinational R&D companies. There are totally around, in India, 1,200 of them. And many companies are generating 1/3 of their IP today, global IP, by using Indian IQ. So our young people are capable of sort of developing IP. Our industry must take advantage of that, because the last point is that in terms of input, if you look at the total R&D, then part of it comes from government and part of it from the industry, isn't it? In India, the investment from the industry is close to 40%. In China, it is 70%. So our industry must move up. That is what.
I think that speaks also to the state of industrial research in India, right? Like, which has also been a public responsibility in a sense. I mean, you've headed CSIR and you've headed transformation of certain CSR laboratories, and I think that move to industrial laboratories that are not public laboratories, both in terms of investment but also attention to what's happening in India, how can Indian talent be mobilized, is still missing. I'll ask you a question that otherwise, as a historian of science, any self-respecting historian of science would probably not ask, but I think it is important to ask nonetheless. An Indian athlete brought home a gold in athletics after nearly a century. At the end of this decade, we will be marking 100 years from C.V. Raman's Nobel Prize in Physics, the only Indian science Nobel laureate to have lived, worked, and died in India, studied in India. We did everything in India. What will it take today for a scientist working in India to repeat that feat?
Yes, Nobel Prize is given when there are two things that are done. First, you are the first one to say that word. And second, that word is such that it makes a huge difference. Like I said, science turning left and right, etc.
Yeah.
Now, it is not that we did not have the opportunity to do that. One of my, guru, I respect him enormously, is my idol, is Professor C.N.R. Rao, for example.
Mm-hmm.
His work, for example, in superconductivity. In 1971, he had done this La2CO4 as what happened? That series of compounds later on, Bednoz and Mueller got Nobel Prize, this transition metal oxides.
Yeah.
But he did not, although he was 10 years ahead of him. You know why? Because he did not have a liquid helium facility. Ganguly, who worked with him, actually joined me in NCL, and he used to tell me how I wish, etc. So there are resource constraints. Look at synchrotron, for example. There are 50 countries who have synchrotron. We still have to go abroad to do that synchrotron. So there is a resource constraint, and therefore I'm not happy about that 0.7% of GDP. We must spend more and equip ourselves. That is one. But there are other issues, fundamental issues. I think in terms of culturally, we have to make a lot of change. For example, irreverence. The way children are brought out, as a matter of fact, their ability to question new ideas. See, like, for example, Nobel laureate Richard Feynman had said that it is not so much about generating new ideas, but escaping the old ones. And escaping the old ones requires irreverence. And as you know, we have this Baba Vakyam Pramanam. The moment we say, sir, yes, sir. So that cultural difference is there. Otherwise, breakthroughs will not take place. Secondly, innovator is one who sees what everyone else sees, but thinks about what no one else thinks. So that ability to be able to see what others are doing, like if you look at the Nobel Prize in Medicine, Warren Marshall got it. Actually, everybody thought that the stomach ulcer is because of some excessive acid and so on and so forth, etc. No, they believe that there is a bacteria, and they proved. I mean, they were ridiculed basically, but they proved that it is the sort of that requires persistence. Similarly, that ability to, when you look at a failure in my own life, if I had more time, I would have told you how we got some of the breakthroughs in terms of serendipity. When I got the Lenovo Science Prize, by the way, this highest award of the Third World Academy, that was for the science that we did on stimuli responsive, getting some breakthroughs like macroscopic sort of reorganization or healing, etc., etc. They all came from breakthrough. There were Nobel Prizes like W. Röntgen getting X-rays or Alexander Fleming getting penicillin, etc. But when you look at a failure, to be able to think that it's not a failure, but there's something, etc. So I think the short answer to your question is that, yes, you can't keep on complaining about resources. I mean, after all, the Nobel Prize for graphene went for Scotch tape and piece of graphite. That's a classical case, isn't it? They folded, unfolded. How much does it cost? 20 rupees, 30 rupees? But what do you do with that that is important. But to be able to do that, right from the education system onwards and creating that. I tried to do something, by the way, in terms of when I was NCA director, I created a kite flying fund because you have to take risks and audaciously. When I was at CSR, my CSR colleagues, if you remember, we created a new idea fund, where failure was an idea where chance of success is 1 in 100. We would succeed, etc., etc. But it was no shortage of funds. It was shortage of those ideas that sort of matter. So India must do that. Being able to say the first word, not look through the windows others have opened, but create our own windows through which we look at. I think that has to be the change.
Again, as I said, I'm by training, I'm a historian of science. So, we ask very different questions, but I couldn't agree with you more because from whatever I have spent my time studying, failure is a bad word. One almost doesn't discuss it, in life for anything. It is not something to be discussed. It's something to be covered. It's something, risk-taking behavior is to be avoided. And of course, there are very many other cultural reasons that go into it. And, when one could talk about that until the cows come home and go back again. But we are coming towards a close for this evening, and I wish one could continue. But I do still want to ask you 2 questions. And let's take them as briefly as we possibly can. I want to know what has been your most trying moment and your most memorable moment in the decades of your engagement with science and industry in India?
Yes. Well, trying moments, there is so many which tested me out, but one of them I remember, there are, if you Google Mashelkar, the first thing that will come up is Mashelkar committees. Okay? And there have been 16 Mashelkar committees. In fact, I remember when I got Padma Bhushan, I went early to Rashtrapati Bhavan, and one of the individuals who got Padma Bhushan, he was in government, and he said, we miss Mashelkar committees. So I said, why? Because he said, when in difficulty, government will form a Mashelkar committee. That was, so they trusted me somehow or the other, and so on. So when you have a Mashelkar committee like that, you are dealing with contentious issues, like, for example, national auto fuel policy. And I've done all sorts of things, by the way, drug regulatory systems, education, this everything, including, the new institutes of NITs, National Institute of Technology, they came from a Mashelkar committee in 1990. But national auto fuel policy is a classical case where we wanted to set up the auto fuel policy standards. There's that is the Bharat 2, Bharat 3, Bharat 4, Euro 2, Euro 3, Euro 4 standards, etc. Now, I'm trained as an engineer, and therefore, if you are looking at, for example, putting those in practice, so let us say you want Euro 4, then you require Euro 4 engines, and you require Euro 4 fuel. Euro 4 fuel means 50 parts per million diesel. That means from 500 parts to get to 50 parts, you have to create hydrodesulfurization. And that would take 60 to 70,000 crore. And that would take 4 to 5 years. Similarly, getting ready on the engines, etc. So I did all that calculation, my team, it was a great committee, and we did all that and gave her this thing. I was attacked. I was attacked by saying that I have given deliberately sort of a slow roadmap because I'm sold to oil companies and I'm sold to car companies. And I remember Times of India front page, and they would not say Mashelkar committee, Mashelkar. For 6 continuous days, it appeared on the front page. And on the 7th day, and I was telling this to late Dilip Padgaonkar, he was the former editor, they put me on the inside of the cover and said the most harassed man of the week. Those memories I have, and also something similar that happened in drug regulatory authority, etc. So what happens is that when you chair these committees, you can't please everyone, and there is the issue. What are my most cherished moments? My CSR appearing as the top 10 achievements of Indian science and technology in the 20th century. Starting from Ramanujan to Meghnad Saha to S.N. Bose to Raman, etc., etc., and finally ending up with that transformation that all the CSR family did together. That was a great moment in my life, I would say. Personally, for me, signing in the book
at the Royal Society.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is indeed a fabulous moment. I will take the liberty of asking you one last question because it is an important question. India today is a country of the young people we must address, we must serve well because we have a responsibility towards them, but also towards our own future, towards the future of our society, our communities. They need to realize themselves in ways in which are meaningful to themselves, but also to people around them. What is your message to them and to those whose responsibility it is to ensure that they're mentored in ways that they can be irreverent, for example, risk-taking, for example, respectful of failure, for example? What is your message to them?
Yeah, I'll very quickly give what is now known as 5 Mashelkar mantras, by the way, because this is not the first time I'm saying that, but I like to repeat them because this is what I have learned in my life. Very quickly, they are the following. The first is aspirations are your possibilities. Keep them high. That's extremely important. If you aim at Everest, at least you will reach Kanchenjunga. But if you aim at Kanchenjunga, you will not even. So if you aim at bronze medal, you will not win a medal. But if you aim at gold, at least you will make it bronze. And I have demonstrated that. My same National Chemical Laboratory, where people were doing nothing but reverse engineering and copying, they were able to actually create patterns which were licensed to the leader in the world. That was the power. And that was hidden till we sort of challenged them. So keep your aspirations high. That is very important. The second is purpose, perseverance, and passion. There has to be a big purpose in life. North Star, Dhruv Tara jisko hum kehte hain na, and you have to work towards that. But perseverance is extremely important. It is always too early to quit. Winners never quit, are never quitters, and quitters are never winners. Okay. And you talked about failure. I interpret failure in a completely different way. Fail is FAIL, first attempt in learning, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Your best guru is your last mistake, as long as you learn sort of from it. And I have had many failures. The third Mashelkar mantra is you keep on knocking on the doors and they don't open and you get frustrated. Don't. Create your own doors. Like I give my personal example, when the door was not opening because I would get the equipment after 2 years. I said, forget about it. I'll create my own doors. Went into modeling and simulation. And Janvi, I'm very proud to say I started that work in 77. For 82, I got the Bhatnagar Prize for that work. And I've been just sitting there, still trying to knock on the door. It could not happen. That's the third. Fourth, very important for the young people. Like instant coffee, there's no instant success. All right. And you have to work hard. There's no substitute to hard work. I'm 78 going on to 79 now. I am doing 24/7, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and will do so till the last day of my life. All I would say to young people is that work hard in silence, let success make all the noise, because that is another of our challenge, by the way. And the last point is there is no limit to human endeavor, no limit to human imagination, etc. So let me end with an anecdote. Basically, Professor C.N.R. Rao, I want to pay my respects to him. I remember when I became FRS, and I just now told you how only 3 engineering scientists in 360 years, etc., etc. I called him and said, sir, I've become FRS. You know what was his response? Not bad. So I was very disappointed. I got another such honor, etc. I will not go through. 2-3 times it happens. And in fact, the US National Academy of Inventors, I was the first Indian from India to get it. Even then, he said, not bad. Then I got upset and I said, sir, what do I have to do to impress you? And I still remember, he calls me Ramesh, by the way. My former name is Raghunath Mashelkar, but people close to me call me Ramesh. He said, Ramesh, you are climbing on a ladder of excellence. There's no limit. Accepting the limit that you put on yourself. So, Janvi, translating it into other, what it means is that no matter what you get, you have to say, my best is yet to come. And I say to the young people that whether you are 18 or 80, every day, even at 78, in the morning when you get up, you say, my best is yet to come. And maybe today is the day, and keep on doing it till the last day of one's life. And it is not my best just for myself, for my society, for my India. And if all billion plus Indians do it, you can imagine what position India will have in the Committee of Nations. That's my 5th Mashelkar mantra.
Thank you. This is, your optimism is in many ways inspiring, because I find myself often in this situation where, this dissatisfaction, nothing is enough. And, you have to kind of, in a way, resign yourself to that misery that comes with saying, no, there's still more that can be done. There's still more that can be done. And it's a joyful misery of its own kind, I think, for those of us who learn to live with it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have lots of questions, and I'm going to start with a question that came to us from Sudesh Venkatesh, who said something, and I think he wrote this question as you were speaking, because he starts out by saying that India has had 18 Mashelkar committees, if I'm right. And it is probably because you have in many ways shown the ability to build convergence and to take people along. So can you focus or say a little bit more about this aspect of your leadership?
Oh, that's an excellent question, by the way. That is something I learned from that experiment I talked about. The experiment that my teacher showed. I did not tell you about all the lessons. If you look at that convex lens example, what does it do? If you look at sun's rays, they're all parallel.
Correct.
Okay. And what is the property of parallel lines? They don't meet. What does convex lens do?
Converges them.
Bring all sort of together, So that's what it is all about, basically, because that is where it comes to our leadership also, when we talk about as a divided India based on race, religion, this, etc. We need leadership which will bring all of them together, not concave lens leadership, which actually takes them sort of farther apart. That's very important. And I tried to do that. In National Chemical Laboratory, for example, we had inorganic chemistry and organic chemistry, etc. We said, no, what? CSR, all my colleagues in CSR, for example, team CSR, one CSR. When we began, there was, sometimes 2 laboratories used to compete. By the time I left, I remember there was one project where 19 laboratories working together. And Professor Shekhar Mande, who is now the Director General of CSR, he's a great convergence leader, by the way. He's absolutely phenomenal. they have been able to do by getting all CSI together. So what applies there also applies in committees, by the way. For example, on the national auto fuel policy, I had these NGOs who wanted Euro 4 tomorrow. You get my point without looking at the other sort of aspects of that. Same thing about the drug regulatory committees. We had sort of issues. So getting convergence, basically, I think you have spotted it absolutely right. And what I find is that, I'm sorry, I will elaborate it with one example because I'm a student all my life and I learn from everyone. One of the things I learned was from Ishwari, my granddaughter. What was that? I used to, she was just four or five and she was learning alphabets. And I remember I would be sipping tea or reading newspapers, she would be fooling around. I said, Ishwari, let me test you out on your alphabet. So I wrote A, right? What is this? She said A. Then like that I went and finally I wrote Z, like this. And she was sitting on this side. She said N. I said, no, beta, it is Z. She said, no, Abba, it is N. Right. It looked like Z from my angle and it looked like N from her angle. Both of us were right. So the ability to put yourself in their position. We talk about Naxalites. We talk about so many things. We have to put ourselves in their position. So I had, and my mother had taught me that, I must say, she was a great guru on listening to the others, looking at it from their point of view, etc. That has helped me. That is how there have been 16 Mashalka committees, I propose.
Okay. Yes, I think listening, converging, understanding important elements that often don't get discussed in the context of science and technology. And so I'm glad that you bring them up. I have a question now from Preeta Subramaniam, who wonders if India is still going through a talent drain. That's one question. Or is there a strong scientific community here? So in many ways, what she's asking for is your assessment of what is the strength and quality of the scientific community in India today.
Oh, yes. I personally feel that the potential is very high. Because otherwise there is no reason why the same scientist should do well in Harvard, Caltech, Princeton, etc., etc. The question of giving them that flexibility, that freedom to experiment, that freedom to fail, challenging them, like I demonstrated, that same laboratory where only copying, turned out to be a leader, so as to say, in terms of generating new ideas. So I think it is the question of creating the right ecosystem, if you like. I remember, there are these science congresses every year, as you know, and the Prime Minister actually talk about science and guide us. And I've been listening to these speeches all along, for example, and one of the things people have, the Prime Ministers have continuously talked about is that right from 1989, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, I was a member of Science Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister. He talked about two things. He talked about raising GDP to 2% as well as debureaucratization. Year 2000, Atalji talked about 2% as well as debureaucratization. 2011, I remember Dr. Manmohan Singh talking about 2% as well as debureaucratization. And our Honorable Prime Minister, he also actually, and he put it in his own interesting sort of way about 2%, of course, and debureaucratization. So it is not that the leadership is not aware, but I think that does come in the way, as a matter of fact, because science is a journey. Science can be, for example, audited in the way that you do. In fact, I remember when I was in Delhi, I said, look, science being an exploration, you can't use the same metrics as you do for others, like road building, where you can say 11 kilometers per day and you can measure, and so on and so forth. Our systems have not still been geared to it. So I think, as I said, our potential is absolutely huge. We need to create that ecosystem, not just by putting in more money, but, it is sort of very obvious that a bird cannot fly with weight attached to his legs. Actually, we must free him and allow him to sort of fly away and not be a part of the flock. What is important is that even when birds fly, you know, one of the birds has an ability to move away from the flock. We don't have system by which we appreciate that. You know, we have to create a sort of a society which actually appreciates that. I think if this is given, we are progressing. But as I showed a little earlier with regard to India as well as China, India is also progressing, China is progressing. All right. It is not that we are not progressing, but they are moving sort of much faster. That is basically the issue. I think that environment is very, very critical.
As the last question, I'm going to combine a couple of questions that came in and add my own flavor to it. You have, in a way, outlined ideas that should inform how we, in a way, nurture future generations, nurture current generations in order for better outcomes for society, for themselves. What do you see is the relationship between the natural sciences and the human sciences and engineering? How do they relate to each other in order to actually realize what it is you say should be realized?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. In fact, I have often said, I don't believe in STEM, I believe in STEAM. Not science, technology, engineering, and maths, but science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths, as I would like to basically put it. In fact, natural science, social science, there must be a sort of a confluence. Without that, we can't progress. We have used it, by the way. When I was the DG of CSR, I remember I'll just give you one example in order to sort of illustrate the point. How we would have felt if we had not understood the importance of social science. See, we had Dr. Ramaswamy, a great scientist, was the director of CLRI, Central Leather Research Institute.
Yeah.
And we make Kolhapuri chappals.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what he did was that his scientists went there, basically, and they saw that the processing of leather used to take a lot of time, 30 days, 40 days, etc. They reduced it to 7 days. They got a new process by which this thing will be very smooth. The leather surface will be very smooth. So when you cut, there will not be many losses. Okay. Then their stamping process, they standardized. Then they had very sophisticated software, for biomechanics of the food, to get greatest comfort. They use that in that Kolhapuri chappal to sort of slightly alter, redesign, and so on and so forth. So here is science delivering to create a product. They accept it? No, because it is generations that they have been following those practices. So what Ramaswamy and his team did was that they found out who does that village Athauni listens to. And it was some 80-year-old man, to whom everybody listened. So they picked up people who would speak in Marathi, went, sat at his foot, told him about what they had done, showed what will be the export possibilities, and if you earn more income, how the great-grandchildren will go abroad and do this, that, etc., etc. And, he blessed. And you see the difference it made to this thing. It was absolutely incredible. So I think understanding that is very, very, very important, basically. We always talk about user, the customer science, but there is a social aspects, that you have to understand. And I don't think we have still learned the lessons, because I was reading on the other day that in UK, for example, when they created a committee on this climate change, not climate change, COVID, and so on, so they had packed them with all scientists, engineers, and technologists, and medical doctors, and so on and so forth. There's not a single person from humanity, and yet we are dealing with the humanity. Can you just imagine that? And therefore, they have to be part of that core, by the way, in all sort of all these endeavors. So I look at this as creating a borderless sort of. I don't believe in sort of borders at all, as a matter of fact. I'm on this Queen Elizabeth Prize of Engineering, which is equivalent to Nobel Prize in Engineering. And they invited me to talk about the future of engineering. And I said, I don't believe in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, this, that, such. I believe in solution engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And that solution, which has to be adopted, cannot come unless you integrate sort of all these disciplines, because that is what we are all looking for. So I'm a great believer in this. Excellent question. And thank you for the individual who asked this question. I think three of you put it together. Thank you.
Indeed, it was also a question entirely out of self-interest. So thank you very much. Thank you. This has been a fabulous conversation. Dr. Mashelkar, I'm again delighted we had the opportunity to discuss this. Your journey and the journey of Indian science in many ways, how the two map, how it tells us about the status of industrial research in India, which has stayed unfortunately outside of industry in public laboratories, and how you have made efforts to take it out of there, the consequences of it landing into geopolitical situations where concerns like patents undermine existing knowledge systems. The range has been wide and it has been fruitful. I've often said that what we have in India is a very strong professional conversation around science and engineering. What we don't have, much to my regret, is a strong cultural conversation around science. And I was therefore ever more delighted to be able to have that kind of a conversation with you this evening. So thank you again to Tata Literature Live and to JSW for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation this evening. And I hand it back over to Reena. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar and Dr. Phalke, for an extremely insightful and thought-provoking conversation. It has been an eye-opener for us on many fronts. Our sincere gratitude to our partner JSW for their support of the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lectures. I'd like to thank the Bangalore International Center too, who joined hands with us this year. The concluding session of the series will be held tomorrow, Sunday, 15th August at 6 p.m. with Ustad Zakir Hussain and T.M. Krishna. They will be discussing the unifying force of music, India and the world. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Our annual Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai Lit Fest, will be held online from 18th to 21st November 2021. So do watch out for the announcements on our website and our social media platforms. Thank you and good night.